So slang Aknea, welcome to Khmer Voices, where we shine a spotlight on the achievements of the Cambodian diaspora around the world. I'm your host, Vani, aka Vanny. I've been admiring my guests from afar for a while now, a few years, and I think you'll know her. But if you don't know her, I definitely recommend that you check out her work. Here are just some of her accolades. Okay, she was featured in international media outlets like CBS Sunday Morning and the South China Morning News. She's the co-founder of the programs Khmer Courageous Conversations and Survival Stories, which offers free online healing spaces for Cambodians. And she's been invited to speak at UC Berkeley, Bryn Mawr University, Pepperdine University, and Sabaidi Fest. And she also serves as the Chief Operating Officer of B&H Distributors. It's a business founded by her father. And we're going to dive into that. And before I forget, she also started a nonprofit. So you probably know by now who I'm talking about. I've mentioned her in a previous episode of Khmer Voices. Her name is Dorothy Chow. She is the podcast host and storyteller extraordinaire from Death in Cambodia, Life in America. If you don't know what her podcast is about, I recommend you go check it out. She interviews her dad, and he provides a detailed narrative of what happened to him during the Khmer Voices genocide, and also shares their journey in rebuilding their life in the U.S. She later interviews Khmer Voices experts, writers, and artists. It is an incredible podcast, so I recommend that you go check it out if you haven't yet. You know, one thing that's missing in her podcast, though, is her story. So I'm excited to share a little bit about her journey from, growing up in the U.S., being a donut kid, and how she came to develop her podcast, as well as the nonprofit, and what she hopes to do in the future. So be prepared to be inspired, and I hope you enjoy getting to know Dorothy. Dorothy, I have admired you from afar for a really long time. I mean, the last couple of years, and I just absolutely love what you're doing with the podcast, what you're doing with everything else that was a result of the podcast. So today I want to talk about not only that, but, this is a career-focused podcast. I want to talk about your journey on how you got to where you are in your family business. And let's get into the details, but let's start from the very beginning. Can you give us an introduction on where you're from, where you're born?
Yeah, so I was born in actually born in Southern California, believe it or not, and everybody thinks I'm from Southern, although I very much love Southern. I was born in San Bernardino County. Don't know if you knew where that is in California, but was only there for until about 1 year old, and then I moved up to San Francisco with my parents. So my parents had, at the time, a donut shop. And at that point, by the time that they have had me, my dad had already started the distribution company that I'm taking over today. How he had done that, though, he had owned and rented out close to about 60 retail donut shops in California. So if you have ever seen the movie The Donut King, and you saw how the Donut King went on and built all these donut shops in Southern California, my dad essentially did the same thing for Northern. So by the time he had me, he had all these retail stores and also had a main one in San Francisco on Van Ness Street. And so we had moved up to San Francisco, and a lot of the way that I was growing up was literally just as a donut kid, is what they're coined nowadays, but very much being raised and grown up in the back of a donut shop and learning how to fold a pink box before you probably know your ABCs, and, you know, running around and playing hide and seek behind the fryer, which is probably not safe, but, you know, so all these different experiences, that's definitely ingrained who I am today.
Yeah. So why do people think that you were born in that you grew up in Southern California?
I think if you were to compare the two, there is a slightly bigger population of Cambodians down in Southern because you've got Long Beach, which is like the second biggest conglomeration of Khmer people in the US. And I think probably just because they know that I'm within the Khmer space, a lot of people just assume I'm from there because that's where the biggest population is. But I'm not. I mean, I'm still in California, but I'm just up here, closer to the Bay Area.
I was listening to Meili Tao's podcast where you were the guest, and you mentioned that when you were growing up, you weren't really surrounded by other Cambodians. It was more the Chinese population that you were around.
Yeah. I mean, I lived in San Francisco with my parents until probably about 6th grade. And then they decided to take me out and take me to the suburbs of the Bay Area, which are not super populated with Cambodian people. And I think this whole journey of identity really is still quite new to me, honestly. I mean, when I say new, probably in the sense that it kind of started when the podcast started about 5 years ago, whereas I was actually told from my parents at a very early age that if anybody asked you what you were, you just say that you're Chinese. And I am Chinese. Like, I don't want to deny that. But I grew up without the sense of that Cambodianness because, one, I wasn't surrounded by it. 2, I was told that I was not. And then 3, besides the food, like, you know, I always grew up with the food. Besides the food, you know, my parents told me and really encouraged, honestly, to not learn Cambodian. Instead, they wanted me to always learn Chinese, whether it be Cantonese or Mandarin. So I learned those languages first. I always heard Cambodian Khmer in the background, obviously, because that's kind of, they communicated with each other in Khmer and English. But it's very interesting and fascinating when you think about how this identity kind of relates to myself and like how that rediscovery happened only recently.
So are you fluent in Mandarin and Cantonese?
I can understand a little bit of both.
And do your parents speak those languages as well?
No.
Oh,
so
interesting.
Do they speak it like no, they both know how to understand it. Yes. So they both speak it, but they don't speak it to each other. So they both understand both dialects as well. But the main language to communicate to each other is Cambodian and English. And it's probably, honestly, like 50-50 percentage, like a mix of English and Cambodian. So I know there's some parents out there who speak like full Khmer, but honestly, even with each other, they're speaking half Khmer, half English. Yeah, I mean, and I don't know if that's a result of them having been in American business in so long, you know. My dad also having to run B&H in American business and having doing that for so long, you deal with American vendors and, you know, you deal with, you know, so then you just start getting integrated, I think, with the culture a lot easier and faster when you run American businesses as well alongside it.
So why did your parents advise you to say you're Chinese when people asked?
I think if I were to look back at it now and after having done the podcast, I think a lot of that was probably shame from what they had gone through, the war, the genocide, and then having come to America and honestly losing faith in the culture, losing faith in the country. To this day, I don't think my dad revealed to me that it took him a really, really long time to go back to Cambodia after he had moved to the States and after, he had started a life here, because he felt, I think in a lot of ways, betrayed by the country, betrayed by the people, betrayed by the culture, which is exactly what the genocide was. I mean, people killing their own people, which is, very, very rare in history. And he just knew and felt that maybe the Chinese language would take me further. And, so I think there was a lot of that. Again, I don't think he was wrong, because my grandparents were born in China, so it's not like we're far off or that we're choosing something completely out of the norm. And I would say that you would find most Cambodian people or a lot of them are Cambodian Chinese, but it was almost as if, it was almost as if just saying that you're Cambodian and claiming that wasn't encouraged.
Were you ever exposed to the Cambodian community when you were growing up?
Not a lot, to be honest. I mean, I grew up in kind of a more Americanized suburb of the Bay Area. So not a lot. There were a lot more Chinese people. And so
did you practice Chinese traditions then?
We would. So and that's probably a lot of it too. We did Chinese New Year's and read envelopes. And when we would call relatives, you would call relatives in Chinese. And so there was that sense. Yeah.
And let's talk about your schooling. I think you shared in one of, or maybe a couple of podcasts that I've listened to that you're on, that your parents were really strict with schooling, and you are the youngest of 4. What was like you didn't really have an option. Like, you had to go to post-secondary school. You had to go to university. Like, how did that feel? Like, were you just accepting of it because your siblings did the same, or did you feel pressured to go and you didn't really want to go? Just give me some context.
Yeah. I think it is quite common in at least, second generation kids who are the first ones born in America who have immigrant parents, that the immigrant parents would push them to be in the highest level of education possible. And so I think especially as well, since my dad was such a high performing man himself, I mean, let's be honest, surviving a genocide, then starting like this whole donut empire with all the businesses that he's created, like the strength that it took and the perseverance it took to get to the point he is today. It's almost like his kids don't really have an excuse to not succeed, because we would have almost triple the opportunity just being born in America, which I think is an interesting conversation too, because it's a lot of weight to put on second generation Asian Americans who are born here. But yeah, it wasn't even an option whether or not I was going to go to college. I definitely knew I was. And I it's not like I didn't want to go. I wanted to go because it was ingrained in me that was the best path for me and that was the right way. So went to school, did good in school. I wasn't the best tester, to be honest, but I was always in extracurriculars, and it was always fun to me to be part of like leadership roles and clubs and all that stuff. So I really excelled at that. And maybe that's why, operating a business and doing the podcast, it is a lot of time management, but I think it comes as hard to me as maybe some other people who may not have been in leadership roles or like managed different projects at one time. Like, it was always what I did, even from, if you look back at it, I think I was like 7th grade president of my middle school or something, so this tracks, this goes like way, way back, and I love it. And I think it's so much fun to operate something. And so, I had a bunch of extracurriculars. I went to UC San Diego for college, majored in economics because I knew I wanted to be in business, ish, something related to business. But
and was it always the case that you wanted to do something related to business? Like, were you considering the arts in any capacity? Because podcasting, I don't know, it seems like an art to me.
No, I never actually considered myself a super quote unquote creative person because I felt like, and maybe that's wrong. Maybe I am, but I guess I've always identified as somebody who really did well more with like the logistics and the business side. I'm discovering this later on in my life, how I think I actually am a creative person, maybe just in my own ways. I was terrible at art class and I was terrible at like painting and drawing and all those things. But I actually, my parents encouraged me to be a doctor. That's what they wanted all, textbook immigrant parents want for their kids. So I tried to be a doctor. I was a pre-med for like the first year of college.
Oh, wow.
Basically failed my medical like classes, like failed. I think I actually failed. I actually failed chemistry, like first level chemistry of college because I was like, I don't do well with learning things that I can't physically see in front of me. And so the sciences were always just a little bit like theory, and I can't see the cells. I mean, I know they're there, obviously, but I can't see everything in front of me. So it's very difficult for me anyway to learn. Did not do well. And I was like, you know what? If I can't pass like this chemistry class, I don't think med school's for me. So called my parents and said, hey, look, I'm not going to do this. And switched to economics, which was very, very mathy. Graduated, worked at a marketing firm in San Diego for about a year and a half, just to give it my best shot. Because I always had it in the back of my mind because I grew up with very entrepreneurial parents. I always did have that option in the back of my head and knew that was a possibility. So after a few years, I was like, I don't like working for somebody else. And I'm going to try to give the business a shot. And at the same time too, at that time, my dad's partner was retiring. So it was the perfect time for me to move back. And he said, why don't you just come up for 6 months? If you don't like it, you don't like it, and you can move back. Living on the beach in San Diego. So I kept my rent. I actually didn't even, close my lease because I was like, nah, we don't know if we're going to like it. Moved up for 6 months. And I was like, actually, you know what? I think I can make a difference here. I think I can make a difference in this country, in this country.
You have, but let's talk about that later.
Company, in my little bubble of a company. And so, I packed my things and I moved back home.
Awesome. I just want to take this opportunity to thank you for sharing your pivot. You because it looks like everything you touch, it works out. But I didn't know that you were in pre-med and decided, hey, this isn't for me. I'm switching. And it all worked out. So I just want to highlight that to the listeners because a lot of people ask, I was in travel for a bit as well. And I made the pivot into wine. And they're like, well, you spent so much time in travel. Like, why don't you stay? I'm like, no, it doesn't speak to me anymore. Why would I want to spend the rest of my life doing something that just doesn't satisfy me? So yes, thank you for sharing that. In terms of getting on board, so what was it that drew you to work for the family business? Sorry, I was going to do that 2-part question, but let's just end it at that and then I'll ask you later.
Yeah. I think the reality is I always knew in the back of my head that I was going to come back to the business, whether or not I wanted to admit it or not. It I, just for my skill sets, honestly, I've always, as I said, I've always been that person that really enjoyed like operating and watching things come to fruition and hitting goals. Like I it made sense to me that when I moved back up, I saw all these things about the company. They were basically operating in like the 80s. You know, we had a fax machine. And but granted, by the time that I had moved back up, I moved up in 2017. So this was not that long ago. 2017, they were still using the fax machine. And I was like, what are all these things? They didn't have a website. My dad didn't have a catalog. My dad's also very much like, he was very good at operating the business up to this point. But the tech boom was something that I feel like he did not really grasp onto fast enough for this company to succeed. And I feel like that's a lot of family businesses and small companies who have owners who do everything and therefore just cannot keep up. Mm-hmm. And so there were a lot of holes that I saw within the company that I knew needed modernization, but also needed more fire. You know, my dad is in his 60s now, and he shared with me, like, if I didn't come back to run the business, he would have sold it. You know, he would have sold it. And there was a period where I was kind of like back and forth in San Diego when he first asked me, because I probably denied 3 times. He asked me several times. And then the last time he asked me, he was like, well, if you really don't want to do this, because I am the youngest and the last one, he's like, I'm going to sell it. And then I was like, in my head, I was like, oh my gosh, well, don't sell it. You know, like, this is the business that had carried all of us. And this is the business that he had poured his entire life into. So I was like, well, don't sell it. Like, it's got to be something. So I think that's what really, really pushed me to come home.
What about your siblings? Did they ever consider?
They're all very interested in different things. So my eldest sister is actually a PhD neuroscientist. So she passed chem. She definitely passed chemistry. And then I've got 2 brothers who are a little bit more in the arts. One of them is in music and another one that is an architect. So, you know, they all have their own thing going, and I don't think they were as drawn to the business as I was.
Okay. Let's talk about your podcast now. Started in 2021. How did you come up with the idea?
The podcast is launched its first episode Father's Day, 2021. You are correct. But I actually was in preparation of it, and it really started during COVID. So it was a COVID project. Lockdown, everybody had all this time on our hands. You know, I had always, up to that point, ever since I moved back home, always found my father just like a fascinating human, just from the fact that he was able to survive the genocide. At the time, I didn't know that it was as bad as it was. You know, my parents, my dad, really, my mom doesn't talk about anything. I've asked her to be on several times, and she's like, I don't want to do it.
That's actually one of my questions. So thank you for noting that.
Yeah. So she's like, I don't want to do it. I've asked her a couple of questions outside of recording, and she just gets too emotional. So, you know, but I was always fascinated for my dad because he was the one that shared little bits and pieces, not a whole lot when we were growing up, but every once in a while we would have a family dinner and he'd sip his glass of wine, and then, you know, 1 or 2 lines would just slip out that would make the entire table just freeze. We're like, wait, what did he say? Like, did he just say that? And no explanation afterwards, you know. So it was like he was flashbacking clearly to a time that was kept. So I've always wanted, like, I was always my favorite topic in school was actually history. Like, I love history. I think it's so much fun. Learning about what had happened in the past and how had people learned from it. And so again, I just had that natural affinity towards history and that curiosity. Then COVID happened. I had moved back home. It's like, what does this guy really have lived through? So I had gone through many different mediums. I was thinking, okay, maybe I'll just start an Instagram page and, whatever quotes that kind of come out, I would post those, and that would just be an introductory thing. But it was hard to get my dad in the right mindset if you haven't created the space for him to be vulnerable. It's not like it's just going to be like mid-morning and all of a sudden my dad's going to be middle of operating the business, and then he's going to be like, oh, well, my best friend died when I was 12. Like, he would never say that. And you'd have to create the right, environment for people to be vulnerable. So I was like, no, that's not going to work. I was like, maybe I can blog, but I wasn't as confident in my writing skills enough to really blog. But I thought, okay, well, I think I can just talk, I can just turn something on and we can try it. So Googled how to start a podcast. At the time, it was like reading like Tim Ferriss's book, and also, there was another book out there that talked about podcasting, and podcasting was kind of the boom at the time. So a lot of blogs about it. I literally just bought a plastic table from Home Depot, screwed this very mic on one side and screwed a mic on the other side. And it was in this room actually that we did all the podcasting, and put blankets over the windows. It was like, maybe that'll soundproof it. No, it didn't. But we tried and basically just turned on record. And I was like, we'll just see how this goes. Maybe like my grandkids would want to listen to it one day. Turned on record. The very first, if you've started and listened to the podcast, there's an episode 0, which is an introduction, just a little tiny cute little clip. And it literally goes, hey, hello, Ba. Hey, can you hear me? He's like, yeah, I can hear you. And I'm like, whoa, this is crazy. That was literally the first thing that came out of our mouths.
Yeah, I loved it. Yeah.
When I first clicked record, I was like, can you hear this? He's like, yeah. And I thought it was a great introduction to the podcast. By the 3rd episode, we went viral. And I didn't realize that I was going to be striking a chord with the community in the way that we did. I literally just pressed the record button and I was like, let's see what comes out. I did know, though, that probably within this first or second episode already that there were a lot of details that were just flowing out of him that I had no idea he remembered. And I was like, whoa, this is like just good. I didn't know that he had kept all of these details inside of him. I mean, even from the very first or second episode, I was like, wow, this is like very detailed, Ba. And so I just slowly started releasing that. I was very, very adamant on not hiring anybody to do any editing of the podcast. Currently, I do have helpers to help me edit podcast if necessary. But during the core recording of my father's story, there were so many times I had really wanted to hire somebody to edit the episode because I was basically, for an 8-month period, I would sit down with my dad on Sunday, hit record, edit during the week, and then post it on Sunday and then do the same thing over and over and over again. It was very, very live. And therefore, I didn't have room to breathe. I literally did that for straight 8 months. And I definitely halfway through, and many times I was burnt out through it, but I wanted to keep the cadence of weekly episodes for not only the listeners, but also for my father. Like, the only way that we can get and scoop the entire story out is if we made sure that we kept this a regular thing. Because if I waited too long, I was afraid that his memory would have, his mind would be somewhere else. So I just kept going. And so many times throughout that process, I wanted to hire somebody so badly, because there were like times where I was sitting at my computer like crying. It was like 10 p.m. on like a Tuesday, and I was like, I need to get this out so I can send it to the sound editor, because it needed to be sent to a sound editor, because I wanted it to sound good and professional, and I didn't have much breathing room for that 8 months. So
how did you manage your duties as, I guess you weren't a CEO yet at that point?
Yeah, and it's debatable whether or not my position currently is CEO now.
Okay, well,
Dad's still, but operationally, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you were operating at a very intense level.
Yeah.
Lots of responsibility. So how did you manage your duties with the family business, interview your dad, edit the podcast, and having to revisit the whole thing again? Like revisiting not just, not just like you're listening to that story, the story the second time, and then you're going to go back on Sunday and talk to him again. Like, how did you manage that? It just seems so heavy to process.
So, I started therapy. By the third week, we went viral. But by the third week, I also realized I need help through this process, because believe it or not, the listeners were listening to the story at the same pace that I was listening to the story. It's not like I had learned these details. It's not like we pre-planned every time I hit record. I would hit record and things would be coming out. And so the reactions that you heard on the podcast were my own very reactions live. And I was struggling for the first couple episodes, just like, oh my God, this is a lot to handle. And this is a lot to swallow. And I don't have that much time to process, because I do have to turn around and edit this and get it out for everybody every single week. And so the cadence actually would be record on Sunday, therapy on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, edit, Thursday, Friday, sound editor, Saturday, prepare, and then Sunday, launch it and record again. So I had to have that therapist. I would talk to my dad on Sunday, record, do the whole thing, and then the very next day go to therapy and like digest exactly what I had heard and listened to. And I'm thankful that I am in a position where I'm able to afford therapy, because I know it's not easy and I know it's not cheap, but it was totally help. It totally was necessary in my healing journey, and like learning and like actually dealing with the fact that I am hearing all these things and I didn't know what to make of it. So I needed somebody to help me.
Oh my goodness. That is intense. I don't know if would you ever think about going about it in a different way, like just slowing it down a bit? Do you think it would have had the same effect? I know that you mentioned that you didn't want your dad to kind of like think about other things in between. So did you ever consider kind of slowing down for you to process it?
Honestly, when I was in the weeds of it all, I was just so passionate about the project as well. I mean, this truly is a passion project and still is, because we're not making any money off of any of the things that I'm creating. And actually, is the reason why we've decided to open the nonprofit, which I know we'll talk about later. But in the weeds of it, no, I was just so deep in what I wanted to create. I knew what I wanted it to sound like. I knew what needed to happen in order to keep this momentum going. There were times that I was definitely burnt out. But as I said, I was so passionate about the way that my dad's story was going to be told. Mm-hmm. Like down to the point where there were times when he had cried several times on the podcast and got emotional. And for a 60-year-old Cambodian man, that is not what they do. Mm-hmm. So down to like, how much of the crying do I leave in? How much of the crying do I leave out? What part of the story do I want amplified? What part of the story do I believe is not necessary in the way that to tell the story in the most authentic way? And because I held his story like with my bare two hands, and I tried my best to offer the most authentic version of the story. Every time I thought about hiring somebody, I was like, there's nobody who can do this but me. There's nobody who's going to be able to know what part of the stories to keep out, what part of my father's story to keep in. And that was so important to me that I just knew that I just had to keep going. I had to keep going for the project. I had to keep going for the authenticity of my father's story.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I consider you an influencer. When did you realize that people started recognizing you out in public?
Oh my gosh. I mean, people don't recognize me in like everyday life. It's definitely, but it's funny as a podcaster, and I'm sure you can feel it too, but like most of your work is behind a computer and recording, editing, putting things out. Even when you had built a following, you see the number, like you see the number in front of you and on your screen, and you see the numbers and the listenership go up, but you never actually see the impact of it until you go to in-person events where it's for, Khmer Cambodian people. And I think the first time that I feel like I really felt that was probably just last year when I went to the Sabaidi festival. Mm-hmm. And I was on stage with my dad, and we were talking about our podcast and our story. And I would be walking around with my videographer, Henry, shout out to Henry. And people would just like tap me on the shoulder, and they'd be like, "Oh my God, death in Cambodia. Oh my God." Or they'd see me, and then they'd pull me aside, like a radio host would pull me aside immediately. And just like say, "Hey, we need to interview you." Like they already knew just from my face, and I was like, "Oh, okay." And I was like, "Oh," and that's just kind of bizarre to me sometimes, and it is bizarre. It's different from being like maybe any other type of person who doesn't really do their work, who does their work a little bit more front facing. Yeah. Because as I said, in the back here, you just see the numbers, but it's wild still.
Yeah, you have this like parasocial relationship. People know the details of your life, but you don't know anything about them, but they're acting like, you guys are best friends.
I mean, I honestly, my take on it is like, I'm just so thankful that I'm able to build this platform to reach this many people. Mm-hmm. I mean, being pulled aside and talking about the podcast and stuff, it's really, really not a bother to me at all. It's something I'm super passionate about. The two big things that I stand for in my mission within the project, and the Death in Cambodia kind of umbrella now has always been mental health resources. Because I had struggled a lot. What I learned through therapy is a lot of the stuff that I struggle with actually comes from the fact that my parents had survived a war and they had survived a genocide. And I feel like out of all of the siblings, I feel like I've internalized that the most. And maybe that's why I'm also, the one that's most passionate about pushing these sorts of projects out. But, mental health and education, I feel like the Khmer Rouge is still not talked about enough. Mm-hmm. The effects of it are not talked about enough. It's been 50 years. This is the 50th year. And without that validation for the people who had actually survived, it almost is, it will be swept under the rug and it will be forgotten. And also the survivors will also feel like, well, maybe I didn't survive something that was important to history, you know? Like, and I feel like that's very sad because that's totally not true. And I think the survivors had gone through the biggest Asian genocide of the 20th century. They should know that that was a really tough thing. And I don't think history treats it that way. So,
Yeah, I don't find it surprising that, second generation Cambodians in the diaspora don't know anything about the Khmer Voices and even like our history prior to that. I didn't know that much either until, I started really digging into it during COVID as well. I wonder what it is. I think it may be during COVID. I think it's just you have more time to reflect and have conversations with yourself. Like things have slowed down. So when things slow down, I guess that's when ideas start coming too. So let's talk about your nonprofit now, because while you were talking about mental health, that I believe that's one of the reasons why you started your nonprofit. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, we, up until this point, financially, we've been pouring everything into this project, and the Death in Cambodia umbrella. And when I say umbrella, I mean underneath that is the Survival Story program. So if you are in the US and you just make a flight out to the Bay Area, we will cover your videography costs and the rest of the costs so that you can have an interview with my father and have your story told. And that's to encourage survivors. There's also Khmer Courageous Conversations, which I partner with a PhD licensed therapist. So like all these different things down to like the marketing costs and spend has just been out of pocket. And although it is a great way for me to put my financial efforts towards, I think for sustainability, I knew that down the line, if I really wanted to take that next step, that would require a nonprofit status. And so this past year, I was working on and finally got the nonprofit status for the Death in Cambodia Life in America Foundation. And I am still, I'm hoping that this status would allow me to apply for grants or whatever it may be to kind of subsidize some of the things that we want to do and achieve.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing. What else do you have planned for the nonprofit? I guess it would just be the Death in Cambodia umbrella. Like it is a nonprofit now. So your podcast is part of the nonprofit, as well as those other programs that you provide as a result of your podcast.
Yeah, so it's a matter of having the actual ability to apply for things and apply for grants for funding for these projects that I want to do, whatever I want to do within the Death in Cambodia Life in America Foundation umbrella. So, any future projects that I want to do, I've got, some plans for the next year, and anything that falls underneath, uplifting Cambodians, Cambodian Americans, and providing more mental health resources, focusing on finding ways to get the Khmer Rouge history out. Like all those things are our mission.
Amazing. Oh, there was something that I wanted to ask you while you were just talking there. You know what? I'm going to go to my questions instead.
That's okay.
You said if it's hard, you know that it's the right path. Those aren't the exact words. What did you say exactly? I'm going to look up on my phone.
It was like if it feels hard, like keep going or so,
That's right.
It was a quote. It was a quote like that.
Was it your quote or was it someone else's?
I don't think it's anybody famous, but I think it's probably just a mantra that I live by.
Death in Cambodia podcast. Here it is. Yeah, when things feel scary, you're going in the right direction. That's it. Yeah. Who were you talking to at that point? Like, how old were you? I mean, this is advice you'd give to your younger self.
I don't know if it was I don't know if it's a specific person that actually told me that, but I think it's something that I maybe taught myself, learned over time. And there were probably so many times that I had spent a lot of my childhood, making sure that I was doing the right thing and following the right path. And, an example to that is even I wanted to join choir when I was in high school because I also really like singing's also sometimes fun to me, but I didn't allow myself to do so because I didn't think that it would like help me with college applications or like certain things like that. Like I had spent a lot of my childhood making sure that a lot of my high school experience even just like making sure that I was walking on the right path and being the good girl and doing the right thing. I don't know. I started to grow up and realize that like, if you don't take any risk, there's no reward. And everything always is going to feel scary at first. Even starting this podcast, something that you said earlier, you were like, everything you seem to do, like turns to gold and everything you, touch. And that's not the first time that somebody had told me that actually. But to be honest with you, it's just a lot of trial and error that people don't see in the background. The trial and error to even get to this medium, like, oh, okay, maybe podcasting is the way, or like the trial and error with my father and interviewing him, and the trial and error with, I've had my bad interviews too. I've had good interviews, but I've also had my bad ones. You guys probably didn't hear it, but I felt it, and with the business as well, coming home, like to try and tackle this. The first 3 years were very, very hard. Very, very, I was not in a good mental state. Like it was very difficult for me to feel like I was failing it every day, essentially. But anytime I had learned that I had pushed past that fear, it gets better on the other side. Mm-hmm. And everything's always going. If I'm always going to be dictated by fear, I'm never going to get anywhere. So I'm going to have to allow myself to feel that fear. It's going to feel scary. Things will feel scary, I guarantee you. It's part of the process. And I've learned that if it feels scary, you're going in the right way.
Awesome. So having said that, what are you feeling scared about in relation to your business, your family business, and death in Cambodia?
Great question. Within the business, we've been doing well. I've been in the business for about 8-9 years now, and we are in the process of expansion. So next year is going to be very, very heavy for me, workload rise. So we are going under construction, and we are building an additional 10,000 square feet of warehouse next to our building because I need more space. And that is a good thing because that means that we are growing. And so that feels scary. It's just going to be a lot. With the podcast, I had started to notice that there are a lot of people who are curious about my journey because I had spent so much of the podcast interviewing other people, interviewing my father, interviewing, doctors, anthropologists, directors, and all these different people, which I have so much fun doing, and which is why I keep going because I think interviewing is so much fun. But I had realized that there's a lot of people who are like, okay, but what about you? Mm-hmm. What about you? And I was like, there's not a lot of interviews about me out there. And what I am thinking about doing for next year, and it feels scary, but is starting a series of just solo episodes where I would talk about myself and my opinions on maybe first just how the podcast has affected me. Tackling all these different topics, whether it be the business or what it felt like to be a donut kid and how that's impacted me now, and my view on where I am currently with the podcast, where I think it's going, all these different things that I can share with the world solo. And so I am calling it the Dorothy Diaries.
I love it.
I
love the alliteration. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Dorothy Diaries, and they're just going to be me, and they're just me sharing a little bit about myself. It feels scary, but if it feels scary, I'm going in the right direction.
Yes. Congratulations on the expansion.
Thank you.
And related to the podcast, I think people are hungry for that. People are hungry to hear the stories. Our own stories that they can relate to. I understand you want to learn about the history, and you've done a fabulous job documenting your father's story and interviewing experts, artists. But it really does touch a different nerve when someone opens up about their own stories. And you're such a fabulous storyteller just based on the interviews that I've listened to that you're part of. So I think Dorothy's Diaries, is it Dorothy's Diaries or?
Dorothy's Diaries, yeah.
Okay.
The Dorothy Diary.
The Dorothy Diary.
It's still in process, but
yeah. The Dorothy's Diaries, or the Dorothy Diary. I think it's going to be fabulous. You have nothing to be scared of because people are going to listen to it. I will be tuning in. Yeah. I'm very fascinated with what you plan on doing. I'm all about, celebrating what everyone has done in our community. So I want to give you your flowers on the impact that you've made for our community. Did you know that it was going to resonate with so many people when you started the podcast?
Definitely not. Definitely not. As I said, I started the podcast thinking that it was just going to be a little project that I would save for like my great grandkids one day, so they can hear their grandpa's voice and like the stories. But no, in the way that it was received and how quickly it was received, I did not expect that at all. And it was very much a shock even to my father as well. And it took him a while to understand the concept of how big it was getting. He didn't quite understand, like, what's this Instagram, like, Facebook thing? Like, what do these numbers mean? And I'm like, no, there's like 10,000 people that like saw this. And he's like, wait, what? That's a lot of people. And, it took him a while, and it's still pretty cute. But at this point, I think he knows. I think especially when he sees like, we go to sobriety together, and then he sees people like pulling me aside and pulling him aside. And he's like, oh my gosh, this is like very, like, how do people know me? And I'm like, well, this is the power of social media. And so it is no idea at all. And the way that it rolled out, like we were featured on CBS and South China Morning Post, international news. And it was just crazy. The whirlwind that it was striking a chord with so many people.
I forgot to ask you earlier, when you were growing up, who did you look to for inspiration?
Honestly, I would say still my father.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so this project has brought us so much closer. Prior to the project and prior to the podcast, I did hold a lot of resentment towards him because of the fact that he was building and focusing so much on the business. He wasn't home a lot, and a lot of my childhood is very much with just my mom and me, and he also didn't share a lot about what he was doing. So he was always kind of like this floating figure that would kind of float in and out of the house. And, I held a lot of that resentment because I just, I think a lot of us did, who have immigrant parents, and I didn't quite understand. It wasn't until the podcast when I sat down with him and I fleshed out all of the things that he had lived through that I had gained so much empathy and perspective for what he had survived. Because it was only then when I had listened to the full thing and the full story that I understood, oh my God, like, I don't know what kind of parent I would be if I survived a genocide. I don't know what kind of unhealed traumas would still be living in me and would shuffle through my kids, And so a big thing for me, and the best messages that I get, the most rewarding messages I get, are from listeners who reach out to me and they're like, I listened to the full podcast and I've decided to finally call my dad, or I've finally I finally kind of get it now. Like, I didn't realize that's what they lived through. Or, kids who had lost their parents and had never got to listen to the story are using my father's story as a way to learn and kind of take on the story as if it was their own, which they're more than welcome to kind of do so, and kind of those are the messages that make it all worth it, because building that bridge of empathy between immigrant child and genocide survivor, I think, has been a huge broken bridge due to lack of education and miscommunication or language barrier or whatever it is. And so I hope that people can use the podcast to kind of supplement that, and hopefully have a little bit more empathy for our parents.
I want to just, can you remind me, I think I saw on your Instagram that the raw files are part of a university archive right now. Is that correct?
Yes. So the raw files are donated to Pepperdine University, which is in Southern California. And yeah, they have the raw files. So the benefit of that is that if, years, 100 and 200 years from now, when we're gone and this laptop gets lost and gone and everything's gone, the university will still be preserving it, and it will still live and be preserved, so that 200 years from now, people can still listen and learn from the raw files. Let's say if something were to happen to the laptop, which, I have my own backup as well, but just in general, like years from now, people will still be able to use the raw files as a resource and learn.
I love the impact that you're making, and it just warms my heart and makes me emotional. Sorry. I'm a very emotional person too, so I love what you're doing. I absolutely love it. I want to thank you for just keeping at it and spreading the word and celebrating our community too.
I appreciate that. And Vanny, somebody reached out to me. It was Ryan from All Things Cambodian when he came on your podcast, and he messaged me that you gave me a shout out in one of the other episodes, and he was like, and so I feel the flowers that you've been giving me, even outside of inviting me onto the podcast. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much, and I'm just so glad again that we seem to be going in the right direction, and I seem to be striking a chord somewhere with a lot of people. So it must be something that is needed. It must be something that a lot of people are craving.
Yes. Okay. So you're one of my inspirations. Do you have anyone or any people that you look up to currently?
Besides my father and all the things that he has gone through, and just from like not even just what he survived in his perseverance, but just his business sense and perspective, because there's kind of like, two sides of skill sets that I think he has. I don't know, just I want, I don't know if there's anyone in particular, but I just have so many, big goals for this umbrella and this foundation and this world. I'm excited to just continue pouring into it in the different mediums that I want to. I've started the process of a book proposal, but we're still kind of going through a lot of hoops there. So I think it's in the very, very early stages. I don't know if it's even gonna, what's gonna come out of it. So it's very, very early on, but I'm always continuing to strive for more, So I'm just excited for where this project's going to lead me.
Awesome. So we should be wrapping up now. We're hitting the 1 hour mark. Don't want to take up too much of your time. It is the weekend. What are one or two things that you'd like listeners to take away from your story?
I think one thing that I would want listeners to take away from is I think a lot of them listen and see me and they think, oh my gosh, I have to have all my ducks need to be in a row before I start something creative or that I start something. I will be honest with you, my podcast equipment, like I've seen is truly, you can put it together under like $300, people think that you have to wait for the right moment to jump on doing something, or all my ducks are in a row, or everything was figured out and then I started it and everything turned to gold. It's like, no, nothing starts that way. I think a lot of people also look at me and they probably think, oh, well, I have nothing to say. I have my fathers to interview, but individually, maybe they feel like what they're experiencing is not good enough to share. And I just want to encourage people that, yes, it is worth sharing your story. There are not enough stories in general of us.
Completely agree.
We are in the process of collecting. And so if you are feeling scared to share, we have nothing to collect, so we just gotta
get it out there.
Let's get it out there. It is okay. And that's why I think it's so great that, like you're also doing what you're doing, and interviewing the people that you can in your community. I'm so encouraging of all the different international little clubs and get-togethers that people are doing, because all that is so important. And if we're not doing it, who will?
Exactly.
Who will?
Yeah.
So, for anyone who's listening out there who feels like, oh, my story isn't special or isn't good enough, it's like, no. It is. And it is the time. It is the time for us to share.
Awesome, Dorothy. Well, thank you so much for your time. Akon Chraun.
Akon, thank you for having me.
And if you're ever in Vancouver, please reach out to me.
I definitely will next time I'm up there.
What an inspiration. And she's right. We need to be sharing our stories. We need to do more of it, whether that's going on a podcast or starting your own, writing Substack. Let's get our stories down, recorded. Let's get them searchable so that people know who we are, where we came from. And we want it to come from us too. We don't want it to be filtered through someone else's lens, right? And I hope you're doing something that scares you. Like, what are you doing right now that scares you? Let me know, whether that's in a Spotify comment, if you're listening on Spotify, or send me a DM or leave a comment under Dorothy's post in Khmer Voices Instagram. Speaking of Instagram, I will link Dorothy's handle in the show notes. Akon Chraun for listening, and I will be back with another episode of Khmer Voices in 2 weeks. Jump